It's a Monday morning in Paris, 1911. The Louvre is closed for cleaning. A janitor sloshes water across the marble floors. Dust floats like pollen through the early light. Somewhere down the Italian painting wing, an empty space waits on the wall. The faint outline of a frame where a woman used to smile. By noon, the guards notice. By 1, the news ripples through the corridors. By 2, the most famous painting in the world is gone, and nobody realizes it yet. That afternoon, an artist named Louis Beroux walks in to sketch the Mona Lisa. He's done it before. Tourists barely notice him. But today, there's only 4 metal pegs on the wall and a square of cleaner paint. He finds a guard and jokes, "Where's the lady?" The guard shrugs, probably being photographed for the museum catalog. By evening, the Louvre staff are tearing apart broom closets and stairwells in panic. By the next morning, the empty wall is front-page news. The Mona Lisa, missing. Not misplaced, not borrowed, stolen. Before we get into the history of art heists, please feel free to like, subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, let me know how you're doing in the comments below. Now, get comfy. It's time to get back to the Mona Lisa. At the time, it wasn't even the Louvre's crown jewel. It was admired, sure, but not yet a global celebrity. What made it famous wasn't Leonardo da Vinci's brushwork, it was the absence of it. For 2 years, the world stared at a blank wall and tried to fill it with meaning. Newspapers printed the face on every continent. Picasso and poet Guillaume Apollinaire were dragged in for questioning. Lines wrapped around the museum just to see the empty space, proof that something extraordinary had happened there. When the painting finally reappeared in 1913, in the false-bottom trunk of an Italian handyman named Vincenzo Peruggia, it was no longer just a portrait. It was a myth. Peruggia had worked at the museum, fitting glass over frames. He claimed he stole the Mona Lisa not for money, but patriotism, to return her to Italy, where he thought she belonged. A crime of love, not greed. It was the perfect story. A simple craftsman outsmarting France in the name of national pride. The court gave him a mild sentence. The newspapers gave him immortality. And Leonardo's little portrait of a Florentine merchant's wife became the most famous face in the world. Theft turned her from masterpiece into icon. What Da Vinci's brush couldn't do, Peruggia's theft did overnight. It made her unforgettable. And maybe that's the secret to every art heist that followed. We only worship what disappears. Every art thief in history, whether they admit it or not, is chasing the same thing. Not money. That's a side effect. They're chasing intimacy. Art belongs to everyone, which means it belongs to no one. A thief collapses that distance. For a brief moment, they become the only person alive who can stand in front of the painting and call it mine. That's not greed. It's possession of meaning. The same impulse that makes someone reach out to touch a canvas when the museum guards aren't looking. There's something fundamentally human about wanting to take beauty home, even when you know you shouldn't. When you trace the lineage of art theft, you don't start with Peruggia, you start with kings. The earliest art crimes weren't crimes at all. They were trophies. Pharaohs raided temples, emperors looted cities, crusaders stripped cathedrals. Every conquest came with its own museum exhibit. Ancient soldiers stole statues not for profit, but for validation, to prove that their gods had won. Renaissance dukes did the same thing, just with better lighting. They called it collecting. By the 15th century, Europe had perfected the art of stealing art politely. When Venice sacked Constantinople, they didn't just take treasure. They took the horses of St. Mark, 4 bronze stallions ripped from a Byzantine racetrack and bolted to a cathedral facade. The Venetians called it preservation. The Byzantines called it theft. Both were right. Possession has always been the most persuasive form of love. By the Renaissance, theft became refined, papered over with vocabulary like patronage and acquisition. The line between admiration and appropriation vanished behind marble courtyards. Popes filled the Vatican with sculptures taken from ancient ruins. Nobles commissioned painters, then quietly traded them like currency. If you had enough gold, you could buy God's own image, or at least a version signed by Michelangelo. Art became a mirror of power, and power, predictably, began to see beauty as property. Napoleon perfected the system. During his European campaigns, he seized thousands of paintings and sculptures, shipping them back to Paris like souvenirs. He called it liberation, rescuing art from tyranny and bringing it to the people. But the people mostly meant France. By 1803, the Louvre was nicknamed the Museum of Europe, and not affectionately. Half its collection had been confiscated from conquered nations. The irony, the Mona Lisa itself had been stolen long before Perugia ever showed up. That's what makes art heists different from ordinary theft. You're not stealing for possession, you're stealing for proximity, for the fantasy of private communion, being the only one who knows where beauty sleeps. The Mona Lisa became untouchable because she vanished. Every empty frame since has echoed that image, a negative space that somehow feels sacred. When thieves cut a painting from its frame, they aren't just removing it from a wall. They're removing it from civilization's shared custody. They create a hole in collective memory and fill it with mystery. And mystery, as it turns out, is excellent PR. That's how we'll move forward in this story. From Perugia's clumsy patriotism to Napoleon's imperial kleptomania to the modern laser-cut, motion sensor ballet of high-end theft. But first, remember the image that started it all. A small, silent woman gone missing in a museum built to guard her, and the world discovering that sometimes nothing is more valuable than the space she left behind. If art is humanity's mirror, then theft is just the reflection reaching back. The oldest art thieves didn't wear masks, they wore crowns. Long before Perugia hid the Mona Lisa in a trunk, pharaohs and emperors were emptying temples, hauling off statues of rival gods, and renaming them as their own. When the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they didn't just take captives, they took the Ark. In antiquity, stealing beauty wasn't blasphemy, it was proof of victory. You conquered a people, you conquered their gods, and their art came along as divine collateral. Alexander the Great's armies hauled Greek sculptures and Persian treasures across continents. Rome perfected the practice. Victorious generals paraded through the streets with carts full of spoils, bronzes, mosaics, entire obelisks. The Forum itself was part art gallery, part trophy case. Roman collectors even coined a term for it, spolia, spoils. Each piece was a signature of dominance. When they built new monuments, they embedded fragments of the old ones. The past was literally recycled into the architecture of power. Centuries later, the church adopted the same principle under a different brand. Relics of saints traveled from tomb to tomb, city to city, traded, stolen, and rediscovered. One monk's theft was another bishop's miracle. By the Middle Ages, theft had found religion. Then came the rebirth. Humanism turned worship into admiration. Art became the new relic, and everyone wanted a piece. Renaissance Italy was a competitive marketplace of genius and envy. Families like the Medici collected not just painters, but whole aesthetics. Their palazzos were vaults disguised as homes, filled with sculptures quietly lifted from ruins around Rome. The polite word was excavation. The honest one was looting. Collectors justified it the way empires always do. We're preserving culture. And in a sense, they were. But preserving and possessing are neighboring verbs. To rescue a statue from a collapsing temple is noble. To ship it to Florence is branding. Even the Vatican got into the act. Popes commissioned Michelangelo and Raphael with one hand and bought contraband antiquities with the other. When Pius VI opened the Pio Clementine Museum, it was filled with pagan marbles the church had spent 3 centuries confiscating from pagans. You could argue that the Renaissance wasn't a rebirth of art. It was a reorganization of stolen property. If history had an award for most ambitious thief, it would go to Napoleon Bonaparte. He industrialized the process. His armies carried not just muskets, but packing lists. Every campaign came with a cultural annex. Paintings from Venice, sculptures from Rome, manuscripts from Cairo, altarpieces from wherever they fit in the wagon. He called it liberation, rescuing masterpieces from tyranny and displaying them for all mankind. All mankind, meaning Paris. The French even created an official commission to catalog the loot. In 1798, crates of masterpieces arrived at the Louvre under military escort. The city threw a parade. They called it the Triumph of Art and Liberty. Other nations called it Tuesday. Among the arrivals were the horses of St. Mark, those same bronzes Venice had once stolen from Constantinople. By that point, the horses had served 3 empires and hadn't moved under their own power in 1,000 years. They were history's most traveled hostages. When Napoleon fell, the Allies marched back into Paris and demanded everything returned. It was the first great repatriation. Prussian soldiers escorted the bronze horses home, British diplomats negotiated for Italian canvases, and half the Louvre was uncrated in humiliation. But not everything found its way back. Some works disappeared during the return. Others were sold quietly to cover costs. The ledger of loss and restitution has never balanced. The episode taught Europe a paradox it still lives with. If everyone steals from everyone, eventually the theft becomes heritage. Where exactly does ownership end when culture itself is the contraband? By the 19th century, conquest gave way to capitalism. Art no longer traveled by cannon, it traveled by auction. The new thief wasn't a soldier, but a social climber. A man in gloves instead of armor. Collectors like J.P. Morgan or Lord Elgin blurred the line between patron and pirate. Elgin famously removed the marble friezes from the Parthenon under a suspiciously vague permit from the Ottoman Empire. He shipped them to Britain in 1803, calling it preservation. Greece has been calling it theft ever since. In London, society applauded. Owning the Parthenon's skin was the ultimate credential. Museums were born out of that contradiction, public institutions built on private appropriation. The British Museum became a monument to global admiration and global amnesia at the same time. So when Vincenzo Peruggia lifted the Mona Lisa 3 centuries later, he wasn't defying tradition. He was continuing it. He simply lacked the flag and the army. He called it repatriation. The newspapers called it romance. But at its heart, it was nostalgia for a world where art still belonged to nations, not collectors. Peruggia thought he was righting a cosmic bookkeeping error. He didn't realize he was writing the blueprint for modern art crime. Every heist since has borrowed from his manifesto. Steal something priceless, justify it with poetry, and let the press do the rest. Here's the cruel twist. Every theft makes the system stronger. Each scandal fuels insurance premiums, alarm industries, curatorial budgets, and academic conferences. The black market and the museum share a bloodstream. One steals, the other sanctifies. That's why every great museum is part gallery, part crime scene. The walls hum with provenance disputes. Behind every spotlighted painting is a paper trail written in euphemism, acquired in the 19th century, which often means we'd rather not say. The public sees serenity. The archives know chaos. By the dawn of the 20th century, stealing art had become almost philosophical. It wasn't about survival or conquest anymore. It was about taste. To rob a bank is crude. To steal a Cézanne is cultured. Collectors whispered that a true connoisseur would rather risk prison than hang a forgery. Theft became curation by other means. Every heist was a negative exhibition. One fewer painting in the light, one more in legend. And the thieves themselves began to understand their role in the mythology. They weren't villains. They were curators with commitment issues. By the time the century turned, Europe had built more museums than cathedrals and guarded them like temples. But temples attract pilgrims, and sometimes prophets with bolt cutters. By the time the 20th century hit full stride, art had replaced gold as the world's preferred symbol of wealth, portable, decorative, and morally defensible. You could own a fortune and call it enlightenment. But with that came temptation. A single painting could now buy a palace, fund a war, or make a career. For thieves, it was the golden age of beauty under bad lighting. When Vincenzo Peruggia stole the Mona Lisa, he did it with little more than nerve and a doorknob. No alarms, no lasers, no mission. Impossible theatrics, just a man who worked at the Louvre wearing his uniform on his day off. He took the painting off the wall, walked into a stairwell, removed the frame, and tucked it under his coat. That's it. No getaway car, no accomplices. He simply walked out. He kept her hidden in his apartment for 2 years, under a false bottom in a trunk, dust collecting, fame spreading. When he was finally caught trying to sell it to an Italian art dealer, he was celebrated as a patriot. Crowds outside the courtroom shouted his name like he'd scored the winning goal. In truth, Peruggia was less mastermind than mythmaker. He proved something nobody had realized before. Stealing art could make both the thief and the art immortal. After him, every stolen masterpiece was a story. And stories, unlike canvases, can't be locked up. The press fell in love with art crime. It was everything newspapers wanted: glamour, intellect, moral ambiguity, and just enough danger to sell headlines. By the 1930s, art heists were being romanticized the way pirates and outlaws once were. Gentlemen burglars, phantom thieves, criminals with taste. The reality was messier. Most thieves weren't suave masterminds. They were opportunists with decent timing and bad luck. But public imagination prefers elegance over realism. A Rembrandt stolen by a well-dressed burglar is somehow more forgivable than a Rembrandt stolen by a desperate man with a crowbar. The myth served both sides. Thieves got notoriety and museums got headlines. Art became theater. Then came the greatest art theft in history, not by men in masks, but by armies in uniforms. When Nazi Germany invaded Europe, its cultural campaign began immediately. Special units, the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, were tasked with seizing art from Jewish families, galleries, and occupied nations. They cataloged, boxed, and shipped thousands of works to secret depots, castles, and salt mines. It wasn't just greed, it was ideology. The Nazis saw themselves as curators of a purified civilization. Art they considered degenerate. Picasso, Chagall, Kandinsky was destroyed or sold. What fit their aesthetic, the old masters, the heroic, the mythic, was hoarded. It was theft disguised as cleansing. By 1945, an estimated 5 million cultural objects had been stolen across Europe. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, entire heritages packed into trains. When the Allies finally advanced, they found art stashed in every conceivable space: church basements, mines, bunkers, even beer cellars. The Monuments Men, a small group of art historians turned soldiers, worked to recover and return what they could. Their mission was part detective story, part moral repair. They didn't save everything. Nobody could. Many pieces vanished into private collections or the black market, where they still sleep in vaults and attics. But they left behind a strange truth. Art survives even its own destruction. The same paintings stolen to glorify empire now hang as reminders of its failure. As the Red Army marched west, they carried their own shopping lists. The Soviets called their loot trophy art, reparations for the devastation Germany had caused. Thousands of paintings and artifacts were quietly taken east. Some ended up in museums, others in private hands. Today, Russia and Germany still quietly debate ownership over works that change sides more than once. It's restitution as Cold War, an argument fought with oil on canvas. What began as theft became geopolitics. Even beauty, it seems, has borders. After the war, the theater of art theft returned to the stage. Smaller casts, higher stakes, better lighting. March 18th, 1990. Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Two men dressed as police officers buzzed the night guards, claiming to investigate a disturbance. Within minutes, the guards were handcuffed in the basement. 81 minutes later, 13 pieces of art, including a Vermeer, 3 Rembrandts, and 5 Degas drawings, were gone. No alarms triggered, no clues left. The thieves cut the canvases from their frames and vanished. To this day, none of the works have been recovered. The empty frames still hang in the museum, silent placeholders for ghosts. Visitors walk by them like mourners visiting headstones. The frames themselves have become relics, more haunting than any painting could be. It's the purest expression of the paradox: absence as exhibit. The theft became part of the collection. The late 20th century brought cameras, lasers, and motion sensors. But it didn't stop the heists. It just made them stranger. In 1994, 2 thieves rappelled through the skylight of Norway's National Gallery and stole Edvard Munch's The Scream. They left a note. Thanks for the poor security. It was found 3 months later in a hotel room, traded like a stock. In 2000, thieves in Stockholm used a stolen speedboat to snatch 2 Renoirs and a Rembrandt in broad daylight. They torched getaway cars and threw spikes on the road behind them, half Hollywood, half absurdity. In 2019, someone stole an 18-karat gold toilet from Blenheim Palace. It was titled America. The thief wasn't caught, the toilet wasn't recovered, and the irony remains flawless. The line between satire and crime had officially dissolved. Most stolen art doesn't stay in mansions or evil lairs. It ends up in limbo, traded as collateral in drug deals, used for laundering, or hidden by thieves who realize too late that they can't sell what everyone recognizes. Interpol estimates less than 10% of stolen art ever resurfaces. That means somewhere out there are thousands of paintings and sculptures, aging in darkness, unseen and unappreciated. A secret museum of the world's lost beauty. The black market runs on paradox. Priceless art used as anonymous currency. A stolen Picasso might buy drugs, weapons, or protection. Beauty as bargaining chip in uglier economies. Every masterpiece becomes two things: an object of devotion and a hostage of greed. By the 21st century, art theft had become almost mythological again, ritualized, cinematic, and weirdly admired. Each new headline carried the same charge as Perugia's: fascination mixed with faint approval. Because deep down, we still believe art should belong to those who love it most, even when that love breaks laws. If the 20th century taught us how to steal beauty with ropes and razors, the 21st taught us how to do it with Wi-Fi. Art theft didn't vanish in the age of surveillance. It just learned to code. Today, stealing art rarely means cutting canvases in the dark. It means falsifying provenance, manipulating databases, laundering through shell galleries and fake loans. It's corporate crime with oil paint fingerprints. Forgery has become its own subculture. Forgers like Wolfgang Beltracchi, who painted in the style of forgotten German expressionists and fooled experts for decades, proved that the perfect heist doesn't even require theft. All you need is imitation convincing enough to make reality nervous. Beltracchi's work sold for millions before he was exposed. He once said, "I never copied. I created paintings they forgot to paint." It was arrogance disguised as philosophy, but also art theory in action. If everyone believes the lie, does it matter? In a way, forgery is the spiritual cousin of theft. Both rely on desire outrunning truth. Museums learned. After the Gardner heist, alarms multiplied. Walls thickened, staff were vetted, and art began living in climate-controlled panic rooms. The Louvre, the Met, the Prado, all now run more like banks than temples. Motion detectors monitor rooms where art has already survived plagues, fires, and revolutions. Infrared cameras trace human breath from 15 feet away. Some galleries track micro-vibrations in the air. If you sigh too deeply near a Vermeer, the system logs it. And yet the same paradox remains. The harder we guard beauty, the more it feels like contraband. A museum at night looks less like a sanctuary and more like a hostage situation. Paintings wait behind glass, illuminated like evidence. Visitors file past, whispering reverence, phones raised. The art doesn't move, but it travels through a million tiny screens. The crowd stares at pixels of a painting that was once stolen, behind glass designed to make sure it never will be again. The act of looking itself has become performance. Then came digital art, NFTs, blockchain, and the promise of ownership without objects. For a moment, it seemed we'd solved the theft problem by dissolving the canvas entirely. You can't steal what doesn't physically exist. But the blockchain, like every utopia, invented new thieves. Entire NFT collections disappeared overnight into wallet hacks. Digital artists woke up to find their work minted by strangers and sold to other strangers. It turned out we hadn't escaped the instinct to steal beauty. We'd just moved it to the cloud. Humanity doesn't stop coveting, it just updates the software. Which brings us to 2025, and the Louvre again. Early morning, June. Paris, half asleep. 2 guards on the Dinan wing report a malfunction in the security grid. Within 20 minutes, the system reboots, and a single 18th century painting, The Astronomer by Vermeer, is gone. No alarms, no footprints, no broken glass. The cameras show only static for 12 minutes. The next day, social media lights up. Headlines flood every feed. Louvre heist echoes, Mona Lisa theft. The museum, humiliated but composed, releases a statement calling it a highly sophisticated, possibly insider operation. The irony writes itself. The Louvre, fortress of the world's treasures, victim again, the same building that birthed the mythology of the art heist, now trapped in its sequel. The astronomer wasn't even the most valuable piece in the room, but it was symbolic. It's a painting about curiosity, a man gazing into the heavens, charting the unknown. Now it's missing, and we've become the astronomers, staring into darkness, hoping to find it. Interpol issues alerts. Rumors swirl. Russian syndicates, crypto laundering, AI-forged decoys. But deep down, everyone knows the real reason it's irresistible. It's not about money. It's about lineage. A thief somewhere wanted to step into Perugia's shadow. History always tempts us to repeat it, especially the glamorous parts. Art theft has become meta. Every modern heist is a reenactment, a ritual that keeps the myth alive. When someone steals from the Louvre, they're not just taking a painting. They're stealing nostalgia. They're staging a sequel for a story the world never stopped telling. And the rest of us play our parts. Journalists, detectives, viewers refreshing live feeds, waiting for meaning. We're not horrified. We're enthralled. Because deep down, we love the drama of something too valuable for safety. Even the absence becomes art. The empty space on the wall is instantly photographed, shared, and analyzed. It becomes its own masterpiece. The missing Vermeer. The Louvre replaces the gap with a placard that reads simply, "Under restoration," a lie told for comfort. Like a tombstone saying, "At rest." Maybe that's the secret. Every art heist, from temple raids to data hacks, is humanity's way of saying we still care enough to take risks for beauty. We don't steal bread anymore. We steal meaning. The same instinct that makes someone write love poems or hoard vinyl records drives another to lift a painting in the night. Possession becomes devotion. It's sacrilege and prayer in the same gesture. Museums pretend to be neutral, but they're not. They're shrines built for longing. Every painting behind glass is a confession that beauty doesn't belong to us. It only visits. A century ago, the Mona Lisa vanished from the same building. Now, another painting joins her in legend. Different thief, same equation. An object of devotion, a moment of absence, and the world once again reminded that even the most guarded walls can't stop human hunger. Art theft endures because it's not about taking. It's about touching. We keep building barriers, and someone keeps reaching through them. That's how we prove the art is still alive. Maybe that's the true function of a heist, to jolt us awake, to remind us that the priceless only matters because it can still be lost. So the story ends where it began. A museum in Paris, a missing painting, and the world leaning closer to the void it left behind. We call them criminals, but in another light, they're archivists of desire. They test whether beauty still has gravity, and so far, it does. Every stolen canvas, every vanished sculpture, every digital forgery humming through the blockchain. All of it proof that art remains dangerous in a way that money never will. We build museums to contain it, alarms to measure it, and myths to explain it. But beauty has never been obedient. It disappears just often enough to remind us what it's worth. That is going to wrap up the history of art heists. I hope you enjoyed your stay. It's getting quite late now. You have yourself a wonderful rest of your night, and sleep well.